Mutts. I'm Devin Shepard.
And I'm David B. Jacobs.
And we are Cadaver Dogs, back again talking about cursed languages. Welcoming Ellie from Bad Critic here again to join us. This is part 2 of Cursed Languages. If you missed the first part where we talk about Pontypool, no worries. You can either listen to it now or you can just continue with this analysis of She Dies Tomorrow. It's just a good time regardless, and you don't need to follow along for both films. Join us for whichever one you want.
But you should listen to the other one. It's very important that you do. I won't tell you why. You just have to listen to it to find out.
I love having a hype person on this show. This is great.
You should also listen to all of our previous episodes. I think there's something around 100 of them, but
Find the secret message buried in one of the episodes.
I don't even remember what it is. But we've been doing this for years. One of us definitely buried a secret message to some.
Kill his kiss, kill his kiss. Well, if you didn't listen to the Pontypool episode, Ellie is here. She is a movie critic and fellow horror lover. You can find her at Bad Critic and look at all of her stuff in the links in our show notes. And I think she has done well to prove that she is in fact not a bad critic. If you want to listen to her analysis of Pontypool,
I call myself a bad critic just so that I just keep those expectations real freaking low for everybody out there.
Keeping yourself humble. You like horror movies, so I'm sure the other critics look down on you already.
Exactly. And so it's like, well, you can disagree with me. I said I'm a bad critic. You don't have to take what I'm saying.
I dig it.
I love it. Well, I feel like we got the vision of why you were attracted to wanting to talk about Pontypool. But in today's episode, we're talking about She Dies Tomorrow. And I do want to ask, we send our guests a list of films to choose from. What drew you to this pairing in particular?
I don't really know many people who talk about Pontypool or She Dies Tomorrow. And I loved both these movies when I first saw them. They're the kind of weird, creepy horror movies that just really inspire a kind of existential dread, which is what I really connected with horror movies. It's not really about the gore, it's about the deep existential terror that I find very soothing to watch. So I really connected. I connected a lot. And rewatching this movie, I'm like, oh, this is the most COVID coded movie. This is the most 2020 coded movie out there. So
unintentionally at that. We'll get into that.
yeah, and I don't know much about how this was made, so I'm just really excited to learn more. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I just like to talk about movies with people. Really, that's all it is.
And this is why we get along now, because yes, existential dread.
Gotta love that existential dread. Hell yeah.
Let's do this. Let's cover She Dies Tomorrow.
Yes.
Hell yeah.
David, take us away with our summary.
Girl meets guy. Girl and guy spend the day together. Guy answers the door for pizza delivery. Guy returns a different person, having suddenly realized he is going to die. And now, she realizes that she will also die tomorrow. Once back home, Amy calls her friend Jane, explaining her situation. But to Jane, obviously, there is no reason to think that Amy will die tomorrow. It just looks like she is maybe manic and playing a lot of Mozart and has relapsed as an alcoholic. Which, to be fair, Amy is drinking, so technically, yes, she has relapsed. But later, in the quiet of her own home, Jane keeps thinking about what Amy told her about dying and all that, and wonders, what if she was right? Jane then comes to the realization that she, too, will die. This is how it spreads. The infected cannot help but tell everyone they see of their impending demise, and over varying time increments, they all realize that they, too, will soon die. From Jane, it spreads to her brother and his wife, and their party guests. Then the brother and wife infect their daughter. Jane spreads it to a doctor. Amy goes to learn to ride a dune buggy for her last day on Earth and spreads it to her instructor, Adam Wingard, as well. The next morning, as the sun rises, the ensemble, all in their separate locales, they each contemplate their life, their death, their meaning, their regrets, how they love trees. Amy thinks it would be nice for her body to be made into a leather jacket until learning that they'd only need her skin, and she doesn't want to think about what they do with the rest. But she's okay. She's ready. She's not okay. She's okay, she's okay. She's not okay. She dies tomorrow. Written and directed by Amy Seimetz.
Adam Wingard's in this movie.
So is Michelle Rodriguez?
Yeah, this cast of characters, they're all mumblecore people, and I was a huge mumblecore person. I still am. And so I just love when filmmakers get their fellow friend filmmakers to make the thing, and they'll anyway, I
Adam
could care less
Wingard
about it.
has cast Amy Seimetz in several of his movies, so
Yeah.
she's just returning the favor.
They're all working together. But anyway, let's start at the end. She's okay, she's not okay, she dies? Question mark. Do our characters actually die tomorrow? The entire time they are saying they're going to die tomorrow, and then the movie ends with us actually not getting a resolution to that fact. We do not see anyone die. So, what were your takeaways? Do they die?
I still don't know how to read this movie, and I feel very, very affected by it. It's a very vibey movie, but I think there's a kind of poetry to the title of like, well, tomorrow is never here, right? Tomorrow is never today.
Mm,
So now it's today. Well, tomorrow is tomorrow. Kisses kill. Maybe I'm infected. It's fine. But I think that's part of the sort of final act of this movie, right? Is that once the horror has been accepted, the characters have to face the next steps of tomorrow never coming and it being imminent at the same time.
Yeah, which is what makes it so horrifying. Amy Seimetz has actually described she suffers from anxiety and wanted the film to feel like an anxiety attack.
it
And I'm
does.
like, yeah, that is
Is
exactly
a
what this feels
thousand
like.
percent, yeah.
Yeah. It is like this existential dread that is constantly hovering over you, and it feels like it is never going to end until suddenly it ends. And
Mhm.
that's how she said she wanted the end of this movie to be, is like you just don't know when you'll snap out of this anxiety attack, and it could be anything, and you're just going to feel like you're dying until suddenly you aren't anymore.
It's very, I like that word, poetry. It does feel very poetic, almost like it's a poem given form as a film. It was very tricky to write the summary for this movie because I don't really know what happens in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you explain it? I'm calling them infected or sick, but are they? I don't know. The character is named Amy, and it's written by Amy Seimetz, so obviously this character can be seen as sort of a stand-in, and I kind of started making a meal out of that. Jane is also played by Jane Addams, and they're friends in real life, so there's a little meta-ishness to it that got me thinking. Because the only character that we know for sure dies is Craig.
Yes.
Although it's a little unclear how, it kind of feels to me like he may have killed himself,
That
Mhm.
was how I read it too.
which
Same.
is not necessarily definitive for anyone else. It's like self-fulfilling in that sense. If he kills himself, then is that because the sickness killed him, or is that because he just couldn't deal with the existential dread and took his own life? But there's also, this is about to get very, very meta. So off that and off the Amy Seimetz Amy thing, it almost feels like Amy Seimetz herself is the one going to everyone and telling them that they're gonna die tomorrow. And then you start getting this interaction between the director and the characters. And then you kind of realize that, well, yes, they are going to die tomorrow because the movie's over.
Oh.
Yeah, these characters, they only exist within this hour and 25-minute time frame.
Yes.
Oh god, man, I knew this movie was gonna fuck me up, but, like, god damn it, David, it's too early for this fucking meta ass shit. No.
When it cuts to credits, that is the death of every single character in the movie. They
Hmm.
all die because the movie has ended. And then with that, you're almost getting this, like, their realization that, oh, I'm going to die tomorrow. It's because they are realizing that they are characters in this larger world. I also came to this because it's produced by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who have
Oh.
done several of these bizarre movies. My favorite is Resolution. Without spoiling that movie too much, there is a popular theory about that one where the supernatural elements are us, the viewer, and like this
Mm.
sort of meta narrative about them having to create a coherent story that's satisfying for the viewer, and that's sort of an idea of how to interpret that one. So I sort of took that and then brought it into this movie, and it feels applicable here as well. That they're always looking into the camera as the lights are flashing and like realizing
Mm.
something just off screen because it's us. It's like they're looking at us.
Mm.
I think it's a fair read. My brain can't fully comprehend it because then it will go, like, into an expansion of, like, "Oh my god, th but then this and this and this," and I'll overanalyze. But no matter what, the point of it is that Amy is making a point to say there is a world outside of this movie by naming her character after herself. Like, there's no way that
Mhm.
people watch
Mhm.
this without that realization, and then no matter what, then there is the audience is involved with the whatever they take away from the movie. It is an interactive piece of art, I guess, and that's
I like both of your reads, and I like knowing that Benson and Moorhead produced this. It makes a lot more sense because their movie Something in the Dirt sort of combines all of my biggest nightmares, like my most deepest anxieties is like combined into that movie in such a specific way that was very uncomfortable to watch. So like now I can chalk it up like, okay, now they've nailed two very deep existential dreads in two movies of mine. So great. Thanks so much, guys.
and they're the nicest guys.
So
It's
nice.
so funny.
All right. Well, we keep talking about the movie as vibes the movie. So
Yeah.
what are those vibes? Is this movie hopeful, sad? Like,
Mm.
forget the actual literal interpretation of it. Just what did you feel watching this?
So I've had depression anxiety my entire life. And so the part of what really prevented me from managing it often was that I never wanted to talk about it because I felt like I would infect, so to speak. I would give other people my doomerism. I was like, other people seem so
Mm,
happy. If I talk about what really is bothering me, which is some real world shit, honestly, it's gonna ruin them, so I can't talk about it. So the part in this movie where she's like infecting, or like the people that are like verbalizing this dread that they have is infecting other people, is kind of like my worst nightmare in many ways. But I also know from personal experience that that is actually how you address it. Like talking about it and like verbalizing these like insane anxiety nightmares that you're having is like literally how you cure it, or cure in the metaphorical sense, take the power out of it. So
Yeah.
it was interesting in this horror context because I feel like the final act where they're sort of accepting things and the sun comes up and they haven't died yet, they're still alive, right? You still have to live. Knowing that you're going to die, you still have to live. So it really reflected some conversations I've had with myself too, of this like, okay, well, you might die at some point, but what are you going to do in the meantime?
Right. Same. That's exactly how I felt, and I feel like this is, like, best, personified through all these different relationships that we see is, like, a relief or, like, a acceptance, as you put it, a comfortability with the fact that, like, "Alright, this is the world now. It is just this dreadful, I'm going to die. I'm just gonna accept that." Jane, she is seemingly terrified and like really fearful throughout the entire film until we see her do this peaceful plunge into the pool. She's constantly saying that she feels alone, which is exemplified when we see her interact with the relationships in her life. But then at the end, she meets people and they just accept that she's there and they just accept
Hmm.
her and they accept
mm,
that they're going to die and
mm,
that releases relief. The couple, Tilly and Brian, we are introduced to them and are seeing that there obviously is this like disconnect between them as a couple. There's something going on there where they don't really seem very happy. And their relief comes from when Tilly and Brian like talk out in the open of like, I'm unhappy in this relationship. Like they talk through that part and they accept the problems that they've been trying to keep down
Hmm.
inside. A little bit with Jason and Susan as well, the brother of Jane and his wife. It seems like they are also kind of on different wavelengths, but when they end sitting at a table for breakfast, basically telling each other how much they love each other. She's like, I'm sorry I go on these crazy rants. He's like, I love when you go on these crazy rants. It's like all the fears of how you look to the world being seen and accepted. So I think that reflects what you were saying, Ellie, of like,
Yeah.
the solution is comes from talking about it.
Yeah, it comes from when they like strip away this sort of facades that we all participate in. The first conversation between Jane and Amy is she's like, "Oh, I love that you bought this house. It's such like an important thing that you did. It's really the most important thing that you could have done is buying this house."
doesn't feel honest in that moment.
Girl, let me tell you, buying a house solves some problems, but you got a whole lot of other shit to deal with now. like and it's like it is a commercialization thing. Like it's not going to solve any kind of existential issues that you have. You just have a large square now. So
A large
a very
empty
a very
square.
expensive large square. So
That keeps breaking for some
and
reason.
just this slowly decaying every second, like yourself. So.
Jane pops in this quote at some point. It's a Camus quote, and she says, "Humans are the only creature that pretend to be something it's not,"
Hmm.
which is not the correct quote, by the way. The
Hmm.
actual quote from Albert Camus was, "Man is the only creature that refuses to be what he is."
Oh,
So it's
interesting.
kind of the same idea, but she's almost like lending an interpretation to it as well. But
Hmm.
obviously, like the moment I heard Albert Camus, I went, "Oh, this is an
Hmm.
absurdist movie."
And it is very funny. Like the humor in this movie is very funny. It's
Yes,
it's it's uncomfortable, but I think it's very funny at the same time.
it's
Yeah.
like almost mocking the despair in a way with the humor. It's very dry. I can understand if someone is not on this movie's wavelength, they probably will not even realize it's supposed to be funny. But like when she's just playing the Mozart record over and over and over and over again. And by the way, the record that she's playing, that song is Requiem in D minor, which was the last song Mozart ever composed. He died while writing it,
He died the next day?
and his widow explained he believed he was writing his own requiem.
Oh, that's creepy as fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Real creepy.
just like a fun little Easter egg to throw in.
She's trying to vibe out to the apocalypse and the fucking record keeps ending. So it's like I gotta pause my drama. I gotta pause my like cinema moment to like restart this bloody record. Like that was the kind of humor that I loved in this movie.
She also refuses to watch a movie because it's an hour and a half, and she's like, "That's a waste of time." And we're watching an hour and a half long movie.
Well, that hits something that I really got out of this movie, where it's like, yes, the existential dread could be seen as like a fear of death. But to me, I really saw this movie as kind of like a fear of not living, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it does.
Particularly like focused on regrets. So many people are probably not us, but some people were like, man, I spent so many hours in front of the TV throughout my life and they have regrets. And I think this is seen a few times throughout the film, but particularly in the scene where Amy and Craig are talking and she talks about her abortion and he asks her, "Do you regret it?" Let's talk about the scene for a minute. What was your
Yeah.
takeaway from this moment?
It's such a human moment. To me, I read it as like she's never thought about it since then. She hasn't had to explain it to anybody. She hasn't had to verbalize it to anybody else. It's something that she has just existed with in her own life, and suddenly she has someone who she doesn't know that well. And it's like a moment of fear almost too, of like, am I going to be judged for this? Do I have to tailor what I say to appease this person to keep the
Right.
situation calm?
Is he going to understand it? She says, "I terminated a pregnancy," and he calls her out on it, and he's like, "You mean you had an abortion? Terminate is such a specific word for you to choose."
Hmm. It's a clinical term. It's the
Yeah.
clinical phrase.
So she's thinking about it pretty logically.
Yeah.
Because he asked her if she regrets it, and she kind of goes back and forth. And I kind of feel like it's not being dishonest to him; it's being dishonest to herself that she doesn't really know how she feels about it. She doesn't have that clarity. She thinks about it because she isn't sure if she regrets it or not. And I don't think she really comes to a conclusion during the movie.
There's like an added layer to that of like, I don't regret it, but I feel guilty for not regretting it.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Mm,
do I need to tailor that element as well? Like, do I need to present? Is this someone that I need to pretend like I regret it for them
Right.
to not judge me?
potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that, and that plays into the
Yeah.
quote of, like, human beings are the only ones that
Yeah.
pretend to be
Yeah.
something that they're not.
Except
Yeah.
the actual quote is that man refuses to be
Refuses.
what he is. So pretending to be what you're not, I guess, is a more conscious action. So Jane is sort of attributing more of a conscious desire to pretend to that, more of a lying to others. Whereas in the actual quote, you realize that actually it's about lying to yourself. And I think
Hmm.
that as the characters become infected throughout this movie, they seem to gain this sense of clarity. For those who don't know Camuchuel, he is like the absurdist.
Hmm.
He, a lot of people would call him an existentialist. He would not. he did not like being called an existentialist. He said that his entire work was all about refuting existentialism and making fun of it, because he
Interesting.
thought that people saying that there's no meaning and then acting in ways that there are meaning is stupid, and that you should, if there is no meaning, then you get to create your own meaning, and you do not, you can't pretend that you don't have things that you care about, is kind of what he's getting at. He just says to accept the absurdism, to find a way to be happy. He also is the one who said that the only philosophical question worth asking is, why shouldn't we all kill ourselves? Which is a very different way to ask what the meaning of life is. He doesn't give a fuck what the meaning of life is. He's like,
Hmm.
what is your meaning? What do you want? What are you after? Just that rephrasing of it gives you agency almost. It not
Yeah.
almost, it does. It gives you agency.
Like, it makes you think about why your well, life is worth living, but why it's useful, while we're going dark here, which is interesting because Amy also, wants to be useful in death,
Yes.
Mm.
presumably because she hasn't maybe because she hasn't felt useful in life? I'm not sure.
I think so, yeah.
A lot of the systems that we have sort of divorce us from connecting in ways that we would find emotionally fulfilling. And I think train us to prolong our own fulfillment. So, like, weekend versus weekday, summer versus winter. We have a lot of systems where it's like, well, you have to do this thing that's necessary now, and then you have fun is separate, or your own fulfillment is a separate endeavor. So I think that, like, when you are confronted with your own mortality, suddenly it's like, well, why am I delaying all of this in the meantime?
And this will also go back to Camus, because Camus, at the end of Myth of Sisyphus, he's talking about the Greek figure Sisyphus who had to roll the boulder up the
Hmm.
mountain only for it to roll back down. And basically he concludes at the end of it that in order for us to make sense of this futility, what if Sisyphus were happy? What if he were just okay with this? And what
Hmm.
we see in this movie time and time again is when the people become affected, when they're staring at those flashing lights, they smile, they laugh, like
Hmm.
they accept it. They're okay with it. They're not okay with it, but they're okay with it.
You're okay with understanding it. And once you can understand, it becomes much easier to move forward.
Yeah.
So I find Craig very interesting because at one point he says, like, schedule is very important to me. And he seems very
Mm,
relaxed and put together, but he is the only one who reacts violently to this sort of sudden realization.
yes. He fails to find a reason not to kill himself.
Well, I wonder, like, sometimes, this control that we think we have and over ourselves, and when you're confronted with you don't actually have that much control, it's very difficult for a lot of people.
Can we entertain the idea for a second that what if he didn't kill himself?
Yes.
And
Hmm.
because one other read that I saw of this, Amy is an addict, and she in this scene when they're at Joshua Tree, I don't know wherever they are on vacation, she doesn't drink, but they do take shrooms together. I mean, it's taking a leap here, but is it possible that like Amy has something more to do with this death than we
Yeah.
see? I mean, the first scenes of this movie, we see some pretty violent stuff happening, some scary stuff. I think it's Craig who is
Yeah.
Yeah.
throwing things around, trashing the room, yelling supposedly at Amy, that he's gonna die, and like angry that like she doesn't understand, or like and is like seemingly very frustrated and dealing with these emotions pretty heavily, which I think also yes implies that he
Yeah.
probably killed himself. But is it possible that another sort of violence occurred?
Are you suggesting that she killed him, or that he died in like a spontaneous combustion kind of way?
Let's entertain the theory that she killed him. Does that change anything with how Amy is reacting to life in this moment?
I think it's totally possible. I also can read it like he accidentally hurts himself in a way and he accidentally dies and she doesn't know how to
Yeah.
help him. But there's definitely, like, what starts her getting back to her house and starting to drink, right? Like, there's steps involved there that before we don't see her buying alcohol really. So there's definitely room for interpretation that, like, this wasn't necessarily by his hand, but it's kind of an implosion.
It would reframe a lot of her actions as the trauma from having taken a life.
True.
Or from seeing life taken also, yeah,
Yes.
if he didn't kill himself and there was an accident that she was possibly involved in, whether voluntary or
Mhm.
involuntary, she is then suffering grief.
If it was involuntary on both of their parts, and I also think that that would entertain the notion that like they just it's actually just true and they will die tomorrow and it's just some spontaneous combustion thing. Like that is
Mm,
also
Yeah.
a possibility. It doesn't make sense. It's absurd, but life is absurd.
yeah. Life was absurd. Fun fact, the tanner or the leather shop guy is a famous absurdist filmmaker.
Oh, really? Wait, who
Oh,
is he?
really?
His name is James Benning. I personally don't know his work, but I saw people writing about his work when
Oh.
analyzing this film, and I was like, "Oh, cool."
Cool.
That was
Um,
probably the most horrific scene of just him describing the process of leatherworking.
In One Night Ultimate Werewolf, the goal is to figure out which person is a werewolf so that you can kill them before they kill you. But if the card you draw is the Tanner, then your job is instead to convince everyone that you're the werewolf so that they'll kill you because your job sucks so much and you want to die.
Oh.
um, cool.
I've never played that.
That's dark. Um, this film was completed before COVID ruined all our lives, but it did come out in 2020, and it resonates with a lot of people, I think, because of what we were experiencing at the time. And I wanted to ask what you saw and why you think it resonated with audiences that were currently going through the pandemic.
I think that a lot of what we've talked about that realization of your impending mortality, like even if you don't die tomorrow, you are going to die eventually. That was kind of a theme of COVID-19, was us all kind of realizing our mortality if we hadn't previously. That's probably why a lot of horror fans seem to be dealing with it a little better because we regularly reckon with our mortality because we're just used to that. And in addition to that, I think it also gets into the isolation feeling of the pandemic. During the pandemic, if you were in a solid relationship and you moved in together and maybe you would get closer than ever, or maybe you would realize that you hate each other and break up. And that happened to a lot of people. There was a lot of just random bursts of anxiety and pissing people off and just saying random bullshit and fighting and arguing and bickering. Characters in this movie are not very good at social distancing. They keep walking up to each other and just being like, "I'm going to die tomorrow and now you are too." But because they're isolated, because they're lonely. Jason and Susan actually are the ones who stay home. They still spread it to their daughter, so that sucks. But
Yeah.
they didn't actually leave because they had each other at home. But
Mhm.
everyone who was alone, who was not with anyone else, would go out. They would go to the doctor, to a dune buggy person, and just keep spreading the illness to everyone. And almost just is tapping into like, we need people,
Yeah.
we need human contact. That being isolated, being alone it fucking sucks.
Which goes to what we were saying earlier is like the way to like help live with a lot of these issues is to talk about them and is to be with people and communicate with people.
We were all sort of like stripped away of our like nice things that we can do to sort of distract from this very real existential dread that we all face. It was also a very confronting time of like, well, now that you don't have all of these things to take away from your introspective, like, well, what do you do? And I love that her way of showing that in this movie is that the characters are just like looking at the viewer directly. And I also love that shot where the couple are both having their moment and then she cuts to show them just talking to nothing, like separately. Again, like this humor is such a fine line that she weaves into these like very emotional moments. I really connected with that, like, okay, you have to face this reality and it's not going anywhere. It's right in your face.
So now it's time for Papa Rob's favorite part of the show, the bone review sections, where we rate She Dies Tomorrow on a scale of 1 to 4 bones. Starting us off with Devin Shepard.
She Dies Tomorrow is so fucking heavy, dude. Like, when a movie is effective, it gets a high bone rating. Amy Seimetz does so well at really, again, creating that feeling of an anxiety attack, which is so hard to do in film. I love all the people involved with this movie. I think they give really beautiful performances when, like, we don't know much about their characters, but we understand so much about their lives through strictly the performance and the direction. I think it's so powerful. It's simple and effective and horrifying. in a film that like really doesn't feel like a horror movie. It kind of just feels like life, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
sad. Yeah, I love the filmmaking techniques. I love the little quirks. I think the cinematography is pretty cool. It's my kind of movie. So I'm gonna give it 3 bones. I think it's still, a little slow if you're not feeling it. And it is a mumblecore movie. So it still has its moments of just being a little quiet, but that's totally fine. Ellie, what is your review?
Okay, my review. Listen, I'm gonna go for 3.5 bones on this one.
Damn.
I think it's definitely not for everybody, and I'm sure it frustrates a lot of people. But not only is it very well performed, well written, I think it looks beautiful. I think it's shot really, really well. I part of what I love about independent cinema is like you just see stuff that looks so fucking good sometimes, and you're like, I've never thought about putting a scene together that way. I've never thought about talking about this feeling in that way. So this is a solid one. If you're into cosmic horror, I think it's a must watch. I'll leave it at that.
This movie is a bit slow and it's pretentious, kind of, except it's also anti pretentious and is like making fun of itself for being pretentious. And I kind of love that. Amy Seimetz talked about the humor, saying that she was like making fun of her own self indulgence. So she gets it. This is one of those movies where it's super abstract and weird, but it just fucking works. And after researching it and thinking about it more for this episode, seeing all the Albert Camus in this movie and realizing that it's just like basically an absurdist work, I'm in. I self identify as an absurdist for those who don't know. So that's why I kept talking about that. So I'm going to give this 3 bones. I really like this movie. I find it very effective and moving, even if it's still a bit slow and repetitive.
There we go. That's respectable, I think.
Also, yet again, proving yes, we are a little bit pretentious on this podcast. Doesn't matter. No, it's fine.
Listen, I'm bad at being a critic, so like you don't have to listen to what I say.
We are pretentious, but we understand that we're pretentious and we make fun of ourselves for being pretentious. And also, sometimes we like shit like *Malignant* or whatever, or *Frankenhooker*. We balance it out. You gotta like the pretentious movies and the not pretentious movies. I have been accused of being pretentious. I have also been accused of having like trash taste. So,
No, there's no such thing as trash. It's all
exactly.
it's all worthwhile.
Exactly.
Unless it's Megalopolis, in which case, stop it.
I'm excited. I haven't seen it yet. And I know
Sorry.
it's gonna be no, I know it's gonna be trash, but I'm gonna love it. So that was the full review of She Dies Tomorrow. We like to do this at the end of our analysis of 2 films is to compare the two. And as we said before, the main theme for both of these films that we wanted to explore was the use of language, specifically curse language in horror cinema. These 2 films, seemingly so different, again, Pontypool and She Dies Tomorrow, but really I think are saying a lot of the same things in a weird way.
Yeah.
Pontypool is actually based in language in terms of just like the words are infected and thus causing people to turn into zombies. And then in She Dies Tomorrow, maybe less words, but more of effective ideas, but definitely a language and communication, I think, is really key across both.
I would argue Pontypool is also more the ideas because you need to understand the words in order for it to infect you. They're really both about the communication.
Hmm.
Thank you, David. That's exactly what we want to be hitting on is the power of communication. So with that, how do we decide to believe something that we're told? Both of these films are, you have to believe the words, the ideas in order to be infected.
Part of the parallels between these two movies is that communication through words is dangerous, but there's so many other ways to communicate with each other, right? Not
Hmm.
just visual expression, but body language, even just this is my communication major coming out. I'm so sorry in advance. But like,
Ooh.
language itself involves a bastardization of your thought process, right? Like you have to process your thoughts into words and someone has to interpret those words and then think them. Both of these movies are trying to tap into something deeper about our consciousness and how we understand and how we connect outside of the very, very imperfect tool of words, of language. Sorry, that was so pretentious of me.
Listen, we're with these movies, like, we're going to be talking about some pretentious shit, okay? These movies are, like, engaging with their own pretension.
But like I think that's an important question to consider, especially in an age where we text a lot, we use emojis. Emojis, I would argue, are sometimes a better way of communicating than actually spelling out your words because it taps into a vibe more than these imprecise words that don't really reflect ourselves. So
Devin, how many times have we gone into an argument because we misunderstood the tone of a text?
Our
Like
worst arguments are because of that. Yeah.
oh, I'm I'm the worst. I think everyone's mad at me all the fucking time, and it's just like no, they're just bad at texting. I don't know what to say. Like anyway,
Guilty.
so communication is more than just the words coming out of your lips.
In response to your question, Devin, how do we decide to believe something we're told? Through the framework of the movies and Pontypool, you have Grant Mazzy actually does doubt what he's being told. He's like, this is completely ridiculous. This is not possible for this to be true. So maybe you guys are pulling a prank on me or something. And he is like demands to go outside and look at it for himself. And the way he starts acting in that moment, because we're watching a movie, so we're more willing to accept it than he is. It almost starts to look like he's infected in that moment. He's like looking around for like bugs in the microphone or whatever.
He's looking under his desk like, is this sound coming from here? Like, I love how they lose their minds in that movie.
Yeah. And then in She Dies Tomorrow, you have the opposite problem where they just believe it for no reason. They're given zero evidence at all, and they're like, no, this is what's happening. She goes to the doctor, and doctor is like, okay, well, there's nothing wrong with you, and she says, well, I'm still going to die tomorrow. I mean, Pontypool came out before the era of fake news. There was still fake news when Pontypool came out. It just wasn't called that necessarily. And now we're in this age where we're increasingly being fed misinformation through like all these social medias, and now there's artificial intelligence just making shit up that people think is
Hmm.
a news source, and it's literally just a random word generator. AI does not understand the words that it's saying.
Totally. Yeah, it's just putting things together. It's interesting. Pontypool came out before fake news was really a thing, but it came out during a time that we were still questioning the powers that be and what was given to us. We
Yes.
talk about this a lot in our 9/11 episode, but yeah, there was a huge pushback against government at this time and in terms of like what they were telling us and if it was full disclosure, we do
Yeah.
find out that they were hiding a lot of things from us. That trust definitely is explored in Pontypool. And then again in She Dies Tomorrow, coming out of the age of Trump and these wow, I forgot the word for QAnon for a second because it just felt like so long ago and so minimal for how it's grown since then.
My favorite topic is QAnon.
But yeah, they're like accepting this that's given to them on 4chan or whatever it was at that time.
What all this is getting at is the next question we had written down here was, can words themselves be dangerous? And based on all these answers, it sounds like yeah.
1,000%. I mean, that's what propaganda is, right? That's what rhetoric is. You're divorcing the context from the impact or the violence from the rhetoric that you're saying. I mean, politicians love to sanitize their violence with some, nice, wholesome words.
To go to a less hot button and more traditional answer, it's calling fire in a crowded theater.
But in that case, can words not also be healing though?
Yes.
I mean, we talked about it in She Dies Tomorrow. Like,
Kill his kiss.
Airing things out, redefining things, recontextualizing things.
So then, how do you manage to communicate the good without triggering the bad?
Uh,
And to make this a little easier, how is that contextualized within the movies? How do the movies want you to communicate?
Well, I think She Dies Tomorrow has a hopeful ending. Actually, it
Hmm.
ends with her being like, "It's not okay. It's okay. It's okay that it's not okay. It's not okay. It's okay." And I think that accepting that struggle is how you open yourself up to empathy and how you learn to communicate with empathy by taking that paradox within yourself.
I like that. And then like Pontypool was like not a good ending because they were silenced. Like they were trying
Yeah.
They were,
to tell
yeah.
the truth about what was happening
But
and
were they?
literally got bombed.
In their broadcast, they're not telling people like, "Oh, you need to make the words not make sense." They're just doing the thing where they're making the words not
Hmm.
make sense. which is
Yeah.
why, if we go off the idea that Mazzy is not infected, it's why it sounds like he is, because he's
Mhm.
reciting gibberish, but he's reciting gibberish with a purpose. And then during the credits, we're hearing more clips, and it sounds like people got better. They're like, oh, yeah, I don't know why, but I suddenly just feel better now. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, so maybe that worked. But he did it by not making sense. He kind of delivered the package without the explanation.
Well, I think like also he's a very egotistical character, and so
Extremely.
he's still performing, right? Even as there's a
Mhm.
crisis happening. Are ego and empathy at opposites? Maybe. I don't
Yes.
know.
Well, David talking, yes. Movies. In the movies, Pontypool, yes, because Pontypool has, I would say, both Grant and, to in a different way, Sydney both have egos that get in their way of empathy, whereas Laurel Ann would probably be the one who exhibits empathy, but she like doesn't have much of an ego. She has much less lines than them. She kind of just pulls back a bit and just
Mhm.
listens. In She Dies Tomorrow, I actually would say the opposite. I think that their ego and their empathy coexist. That
Mhm.
in that one, they relate to others through themselves. They need to reckon with their own shit before they can feel for others.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I know this is like a cheap out answer, but I feel like yes, and this is why art is so important is that both of these films like allow this conversation to happen in that they are not clear in what they are trying to communicate, ironically enough, but they allow for communication in terms of like our analysis of these films, talking about it, trying to understand each other, trying to understand each other's experience while watching the movie. This is why art is important. We just like we're talking about the stuff and questioning the stuff that we're given and not just accepting it for what it is.
Off it being unclear, you could argue that the ambiguity of both endings is cynical in that it somewhat shows that the communication is actually impossible, that there is no way to
Mhm.
communicate without triggering the minds layered within our language. And you just kind of have to accept that sometimes you will misspeak or you'll upset somebody, that it will happen, but that we need to try anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I love this conversation, all these conversations. Well, we touched on so much.
It was a good conversation, and I think sometimes people get really frustrated with open-ended endings, but I think good art isn't prescriptive. It's not going to tell you what you should be thinking. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that with both of these movies that they're like you can interpret it in a few different ways, and they're all valid.
And I really appreciate that both of you just bringing so much to this conversation and a lot of honesty and personal tales as well. So thank you for opening up and just like getting into the weeds. I think this was really fun.
Also, thank you for teaching me about Camus. I don't
Oh,
know much
yeah.
about philosophy, so.
Yeah, he's great. I love him. And Mutz, feel free to, if you think that we're completely full of shit and that we're already infected, then please just let us know
Mhm.
your thoughts. Like it's not a monopoly. We want to hear you guys as well, especially with these movies being so open and flexible. I'm sure there's a lot that we missed that we didn't even cover or didn't even notice was in there. I'm sure. Please drop us a line.
Leave a comment on whatever platform you're listening to this on, and please cure us with your words.
And you can find us at Cadaver Dogs Pod on Instagram and Twitter and Cadaver Dogs Podcast on TikTok and let us know what those are. And then also be sure to tag and hit up Ellie as well. Ellie is Bad Critic _ on Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter too. I think it's bad_critic over there. Check me out. I've got a few really fun things coming out. I've got a really good, very personal article coming out in November with Horror Press about the film Martyrs. And probably by the time you're listening to this, I've already put out my post about Stress Positions, which is a movie that I really loved that came out last year or earlier this year, and a few other goodies. I'm always working, so come check me out.
Ellie's always posting these great reviews on Instagram that like you also get a lot into, like an analysis a bit of the movies, and it's very much, if you like our show, then you're going to like what Ellie's putting out.
Oh, that's so nice of you to say. Thank you.
And also, you can find Ellie's work on Medium, and we'll link that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much again, Ellie. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we hope you all enjoyed. See you, Mutz.
Bye.
Peace. I love trees. I'm gonna miss them.
Me too.